Star Wars. I used to laugh at people when they joked that Disney were killing Star Wars when the sequel trilogy came out. Everywhere I looked, there were headlines and frustrated fans expressing their disdain toward Disney over them seemingly ruining Star Wars and killing Star Wars. And I remember reading those headlines back then and reading the comments and thinking, are you kidding me? Star Wars can't die. It's Star Wars. Well, I think I might have been a little naive back then. A few years ago, I would have considered myself to be a mega Star Wars fan. I created a YouTube channel around it and turned it into a job. But here I sit a few years later in 2024, and the mere sight of the brand makes me want to crawl up into a ball and die. Because I have watched something I love wither away and become a shell of what it once was. And any new product pushed out from this brand is being met with extreme amounts of hate. Look at the Acolyte trailer, for example, and even Star Wars Outlaws. Both were absolutely smashed online. Now, I've made videos talking about the state of Star Wars before, but this time it's different. I have never been so disenfranchised with Star Wars as I am right now. And the state of Star Wars has arguably never been in a worse place than it is today. And as a form of therapy, I knew I had to talk about what the hell Disney have done to ruin something that I used to love and my life just about revolved around. And I know a lot of you guys out there watching feel the same way. Now look, if you still love Star Wars and Disney, they're cooking for you, then that's great. Tell me I'm a dickhead in the comments, that's fine, I can take it. But for the rest of you like me, let's just go on a therapeutic journey of how Disney destroyed Star Wars. Let's vent a little bit. Before we do though, we are closing in on 100,000 subscribers, and it would mean the world to me if you could hit that subscribe button so we can reach that massive milestone. And be sure to follow us over on Twitch, where we chat a bit of shit about movies and play some games too. I think you'll have a good time if you check it out. So, it's fair to say that when George Lucas signed Star Wars over to Disney, Star Wars as a brand was there, but it was just kind of meandering. Disney, without question, brought it back to the top of the pop culture zeitgeist with the release of The Force Awakens. That movie still stands as the highest grossing domestic film of all time. It was a cultural phenomenon. Star Wars was back, and the film was received relatively well, generating strong reviews with the average pushback you'd expect out of the Star Wars fandom. Then Rogue One came out a year later and, to be honest, was actually pretty good. I still think it's by far the best Disney Star Wars movie. That's not really saying much, I know, but I dig the shit out of Rogue One still to this day. But then The Last Jedi came out, splitting the fandom in two. Half of the fandom saying it was the worst thing to happen to Star Wars and an insult to the franchise, and the other half saying it's a masterpiece. Regardless of whether or not you hate The Last Jedi or you love it, it's undeniable that this was the moment in time that put Star Wars on a path that leads us to where we are now, with the Star Wars IP being a bit of a laughingstock. This was the moment where things started to go wrong. Retroactively, The Last Jedi made The Force Awakens a worse movie, as any interesting setup was just thrown away. It was clear that there was just no vision from Disney here, with J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson's films both feeling like they weren't even a part of the same trilogy. There was nothing cohesive about these films together, and it had the fandom in a frenzy. But that's okay, because there's still one more film to come, one that can conclude the trilogy and make it all make sense. Yeah, that didn't happen. The Rise of Skywalker concluded the sequel trilogy and was probably the worst of the three films. Kathleen Kennedy got rid of Colin Trevorrow, who was supposed to direct episode 9, and she brought back J.J. Abrams, who somehow had to pay off the mystery boxes he planted in The Force Awakens, whilst also acknowledging The Last Jedi, which basically threw them away in favor of subverting expectations, and as you can imagine, it didn't work. They brought Palpatine back to try and save a dying story. They retconned half of The Last Jedi. They made Finn Force sensitive because I still don't know to this day. And basically, it's just the perfect example of everything a massive Hollywood blockbuster shouldn't be. The Rise of Skywalker made money, yes, but it continued the downward trajectory, and it was released in 2019, which for some reason was notorious for bad and mediocre movies joining the $1 billion club. It was clear come 2020 that Star Wars, whilst not completely in the ground, had definitely taken a massive hit with the disappointment of the sequel trilogy. In fact, many people were so disappointed by the sequel trilogy that they turned into Thanos and said, perhaps I treated you too harshly to the prequels. Yes, the sequels being bad made people who hated the prequels like the prequels. That's powerful stuff. But little did we know that the sequel trilogy was only really the start of the downfall of Star Wars. Over the past few years, it's become abundantly clear that Star Wars has a serious problem with its inability to abide by one of the main themes of The Last Jedi, that being letting the past die. As it's become clear in the past few years through a series of good, mid, and bad shows on Disney Plus that Disney simply cannot let the past die, often relying on bringing back past characters to make the present shows worthwhile, relying on nostalgia to carry the dead and tired storytelling from writers who have admitted to knowing nothing about Star Wars. Yet for some reason, Disney continue to hire them. The Mandalorian was a nice return to form for its first 2 seasons, giving us a fresh idea with characters that were actually interesting, and a story that didn't make me want to put my head in a microwave. But even the golden egg that was The Mandalorian wasn't immune to how bad Star Wars would become, with season 3 being a masterclass in being a big old nothing burger and a complete and utter waste of time. Like seriously, I can't tell you what happened in season 3 of The Mandalorian besides people walking around slowly and Jack Black and Lizzo. Now, even though season 2 of The Mandalorian was good, it still felt the need to rely on the past, which was frustrating because the show was already good without characters like Ahsoka and Luke Skywalker making an appearance. But it just went to show that regardless of the quality of the story, good or bad, Disney were intent on nostalgia baiting everything they do. Book of Boba Fett came out, and the only thing that was actually worth watching were the 2 episodes in which there was no Boba Fett. The Mandalorian came in and hijacked the show and reminded us how bad the rest of the show was. Boba Fett wasn't Boba Fett at all, and it's clear it was just another case of bringing back a fan favorite character like Boba Fett so we could do the Leo DiCaprio meme, because Star Wars is now a cameo simulator. After Book of Boba Fett, Obi-Wan Kenobi was the next big thing for Disney's Star Wars. Regardless of it making absolutely no sense, they decided to bring back fan favorite Ewan McGregor as the iconic Obi-Wan Kenobi for a showdown with Darth Vader. Now, this was one of those situations where canonically it makes absolutely no sense, but people were willing to let it go based off the premise of the show alone. That being, Obi-Wan and Vader have a rematch of the century. Those are Disney's words, not mine. And that would have been fine, but that's not what the show was at all. As time was taken away from Obi-Wan and Darth Vader and given to a new character called Reva, whose character was a copy and paste of the second sister from the video game Jedi Fallen Order, but devoid of any likability, sympathy, or use to the story that made the second sister such a great character in that game. Not to mention, Deborah Chow's direction was sloppy, lazy, with an over-reliance on shaky cam to hide the budget, because the budget just did not match the scope of the show. The show's writer, Joby Harold, openly admitted that he doesn't know anything about Star Wars, and for some reason was still hired. And let's not forget that the first fight between Obi-Wan and Vader looked like it was ripped from a fan film and shot on a construction site down the road to save money. Save for a couple small moments, this show was a massive disappointment for a lot of people. Oh yeah, and Obi-Wan also doesn't know how to walk around a gate now. Like, what is this, man? Now, it was great seeing Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen back, and they both did a great job with what they were given, especially Hayden Christensen, who was about the only bright spot in the entire show. But man, this one was a letdown. And this is where my love for Star Wars really started to dwindle, and I know I'm not alone here. If they couldn't get this right, what could they get right? But then Andor released, and it ended up being by far the best show we've seen on Disney Plus, dropping the nostalgia baiting and just letting good filmmakers and good writers tell a compelling story with depth and nuance within the Star Wars universe. The main complaint people have about Andor is that it doesn't feel like Star Wars. And that's the point. The fact it doesn't feel like Star Wars is why it's so great. because Star Wars has evolved into an empty cameo simulator where everything looks like a high-budget fan film. Andor goes completely against that. The dialogue in this show makes the rest of the Disney Plus shows look absolutely pathetic. It might not be everyone's cup of tea because there's no lightsabers, but Andor is by far the best show on Disney Plus when it comes to the story, the writing, the direction, the characters, the dialogue. It's just not even close. So after Andor came out, I had a little bit of hope that Star Wars might actually get back on track. But then it was back to regular programming with Ahsoka. Now for context, Ahsoka is a top 3 Star Wars character for me. She's amazing in the Clone Wars and Rebels, so I was really excited for this show. But I did say to myself that if they screw this up, then I'm pretty much done with Star Wars. And yeah, they screwed it up. Previously likable characters were dull and boring. Thrawn was a massive letdown. The production design screamed Disney Plus mediocrity. And once again, there was a reliance on cameos to make things interesting, with Hayden Christensen returning again as Anakin Skywalker, which makes sense due to the connection between him and Ahsoka, but these cameos are meant to be the cherry on top, not the reason you watch the show, which is exactly what this was. The only original bright spot from this show was the character of Baylan Skoll, who we unfortunately probably won't see again as the actor who made the character so likable and intriguing passed away last year. So Ahsoka was yet another disappointment. And then we looked to the future, and unfortunately, yeah, it's not looking any better. So when we look to the future of Star Wars, I would love to say to you that I'm optimistic, but I'm just not. The Acolyte is next on the agenda, and that show has been absolutely smashed online. Leslie Headland has been the punching bag for this show's discourse, and it hasn't even come out yet. Now, I did the due diligence of watching several interviews with her talking about Star Wars, and it's clear that she does have above average knowledge of the lore, but it's also clear that she's extremely egotistical with her filmmaking, and intends to use the show to project her beliefs, as opposed to just telling a good story. You get the vibe that she's using Star Wars as a platform instead of an opportunity to contribute to one of the greatest fictional worlds ever created. And it looks like that's where this show is going to go off the rails. Having said that, the show has not come out yet, and I'll always give something at least the benefit of the doubt, so I'm sure we'll be talking about the Acolyte again very soon. But then we have the Rey movie that's going to be coming out in a couple of years. And this just screams Disney just being completely out of touch with fans. I think the writers of the sequels did the Rey character so damn dirty. Daisy Ridley did everything she could to make that character likable, but she was severely let down in the writer's room. And at worst, for her, I'm glad she's collecting the bag with this movie, given how screwed over she was with the character's lineage being chopped and changed a million times. But the fact this movie is going to even exist is just blatant evidence that Disney are hell-bent on staying as disconnected as possible with the people that these films are made for. There's also an original movie coming from James Mangold, who brought us Logan, but also brought us Indiana Jones 5, so yeah, make of that what you will. And there's also the Dave Filoni movie that's going to bring to a head all the Disney Plus shows, which would be great if most of the shows were actually good. But I'm sorry, I just don't care where the end of Mando Season 3 or Book of Boba Fett leads to. It feels like they're trying to build up to an Infinity War or an Endgame, but imagine if everything pre-Infinity War and Endgame was Thor: The Dark World. Probably not the greatest idea. The only thing I'm actually looking forward to is the third Jedi game with the character of Cal Kestis. Fallen Order and Survivor are great, and I can't wait to see the conclusion of that story. But that's about all that is keeping me interested in this IP at the moment. It's honestly really sad. And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, if you don't like it anymore, why'd you make this video? I made this video because I'm a Star Wars fan. This is a letter to Disney in a way. I'm frustrated and I don't want to be this way. But the way Disney have controlled this IP and driven it into the ground has forced me in this direction. And that absolutely sucks. So to bring this one all together, it truly is tough as a massive former Star Wars fan to sit here and say without joking that I just don't care about Star Wars anymore. This IP was everything to me a few years ago, but the mere mention of it in passing conversation just frustrates me now. And I know for a fact I haven't grown out of Star Wars because I can watch the original trilogy or the prequels or play Fallen Order and Survivor, and I remember why I loved it in the first place. But the vast majority of shows coming out under Disney's reign are just pushing me further and further away from the franchise. And that sucks, and I know that I'm not alone on this one. We used to point and laugh at the people that said that Disney were killing Star Wars. Well, here we are in 2024, and they basically have killed it, and it's really sad. Now, before I go, I just want to say, be sure to follow me on all my socials, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch. I never plug them, so I'm just starting to, actually be a YouTuber for once. You'll get more of a behind the scenes look for the channel and just what I get up to in my day-to-day life. And again, be sure to subscribe to this channel as we're closing in on 100,000 subscribers, and it would just be insane if we could hit that as soon as possible. Like, it'd just be crazy. But that is it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and take care.